I'm very happy that we finally have this session today. Just for those who doesn't know me, I'm Ekaterina. I'm co-founder of 12 Brave. 12 Brave is a business accelerator for senior professionals who are thinking to start portfolio career and start building business on the side, sometimes next to their day job. And we think it's a smart move. And or eventually move into full entrepreneurship as well. Very often when I speak with founders, what I hear that they ask me like, how do I start? So what is legally required? What kind of contracts I need to consider? Like I have no clue about that. And this is why I think it's great that we have today Leon and Matthias, and we have this session so that we can have this introduction and also we'll cover some questions. And as I mentioned in my emails, we will not have enough time to cover all 32 questions. Those who are in the call will have priority, and also the questions that were repeated many times definitely will be covered today. So over to you, Leon, Matthias. Maybe you would like to introduce yourself and Velsa, and then let's jump to your content.
Perfect. Let's get started. My name is Leon. I'm one of the co-founders of Velsa, a legal tech company from Berlin. And today I'm joined with Mathias Fromberger, lawyer at Pike Partners. We will do a little quick introduction afterwards. But let me start, I think, and that's the most important thing is why. Why are we here today? Why is it so important to think about legal and especially about the customer contract that you're signing? I think there are two reasons. I think if you don't take care of it, you won't make money. And I think that's why we're here. In the end, you're starting a business in the end to be profitable, to make money. And that is the sign that the customers like your product. So I think that is super important to think about, okay, how do I legally structure it and what kind of customer contracts do I have? That is the one side. It pushes you forward. The customer contracts, some sort of letter of intents, NDAs, and then customer contracts, right? Those are all contracts that push you forward. That is the one perspective that I see. It's a driving force, and we will go into detail how to utilize that, also speaking to investors, etc. That is the one perspective. The other perspective, how I always look at contracts and legal, is also looking back, safeguarding. So you do your work in the legal work, and you sometimes think, oh, why do I all do this? I have this holding structure, and then I've set up operating company, and I've done like all those NDAs. Like maybe the immediate effect is not clear, but often, and I've started a couple of companies, Matthias as well. He's not only a lawyer but also a founder. There is this moment where you look back, and then you have, fortunately, hopefully, signed some contract, and it will safeguard your company. So for me, it's always those two perspectives why legal and especially contracts are so important, going forward as a driving force, and then also looking backward as safeguarding. That said, let's jump into this little workshop here. As I said, I'm joined with Matthias. Matthias, maybe from a legal side, why are you here? Tell me about you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Leon. As you've already said, I'm a lawyer, but besides that, I'm a founder myself. I've built my own law firm, but I also set up several startups. So I know what it feels like to sit on your side of the table, so to say. So chasing product market fit, negotiating your first big customer, trying to close deals fast while not having the budget for over lawyering. And this dual perspective, legal advisor on the one hand and entrepreneur on the other hand, shapes the way I work. And over the years, I have seen one recurring pattern. Founders focus heavily on product and growth, which is absolutely right. I must be frank here. But contracts are often treated as a side topic. And that's exactly where expensive mistakes happen. And that is why Leon and me are here today. We don't want to overload you with legal theory, but we want to show you where the real blind spots are in first customer contracts, the one that costs you serious money on the long run. And Leon, I guess that's the perfect
hand it over to me. That's exactly what you will see today, a little ping pong between the legal side and my side. I'm not a lawyer myself. I have teams. My whole team I'm surrounded by lawyers, but I myself have a business background. I started actually at SumUp. SumUp, those little card readers, you probably have seen it in some cafes or restaurants. I was in charge of the operating teams in the United States, in Boulder, Colorado. There was a lot of fun, and I spent a lot of money on contracts. And in Germany, when you talk to lawyers, normally between 300 and 400 euros. But in the US, it's 900 euros plus. So I saw this pain point as a tech company, spending a lot of money on legal and navigating a regulated space. And that's why I came back and I founded Velsa. What are we? We are one of the leading B2B legal tools for tech startups. So you are our target group, entrepreneurs who start companies, especially in the tech world. And we have generated a tool or built a tool where you can, as a first touch point, generate contracts, legal roadmaps with our tool. So if you want to found a startup, if you want to write your first customer contract, if you have some IP questions, you can come to us. And the first touch point is digital. So that's the magic that we have built, that the first touch point is not a lawyer, but the first touch point is digital. You can go into a tool, you can download the contracts, you can adjust them. And then if needed, lawyer in the loop, the lawyer can jump in. So it's a positive effect on both sides for the startups and entrepreneurs like you, but also like lawyers like Matthias, because in German, we say they don't have to start with Adam and Eva. So they don't have always to start at the very beginning, but they can actually jump in when legal advice is needed. But not too much about myself. Let's start with this workshop. We will cover shortly why customer contracts are relevant, and then go a little bit down those 3 steps. The idea and concept of your business, super relevant to understand. It's a kind of a prerequisite to the next step. The key elements of a customer contract, and then the legal do's and don'ts. What do you need for the first customer contract? What do you need when you start a company? And now I think there are over 14 people here listening. As I understand correctly, you're all thinking or already starting your own side hustle or business and getting into it, and knowing what is in the next month relevant for you is super relevant. Afterwards, we'll have a Q&A, and I took notes from Ekaterina. She said we want to talk about the legal structure, which is actually also connected to your customer contracts. If you personally sign that contract or you are a UG or a GmbH, that's different. We will talk about the side hustle part as well. If you're coming from a big corporate like me, I worked at SumUp, right? And then I started Velsa on the side. So there was also this in-between time. We can quickly touch on that. And also liability. Ekaterina said there were some questions around that. That is obviously closely knitted into the customer contracts. Let's get started. Customer contracts. I think it's super relevant to understand the development phases of a company to see where customer contracts come into play. So in the beginning, you have an idea and you start thinking about the business model. And for me as an entrepreneur, and Matthias, I think you can relate, a good idea starts with a good problem. So you're all working on a problem. And for me, a good problem has 3 characteristics. Number 1, it's unavoidable. So you cannot go around it. Number 2, it's urgent. So the customers or the clients need to solve it now. And the last one, it's underserved. Ideally, you don't have too much competition, and there needs to be a way around it. When I started Velsa, for example, those 3 characteristics were obviously in place. It was unavoidable. As you can see here, 14 people on a Thursday, they're all thinking about legal, so it's unavoidable. It's urgent. You often need to solve it now. So you need to, when the customer says, okay, I'm going to use your software, please send over the contract. You need to file the contract. And it's underserved. From my perspective, for especially the small, medium-sized enterprises, the startups, it's underserved because big law firms often only focus on the big enterprises. That's where the big money is. But I think the long tail of the market in the legal world also needs and deserves good legal advice. Idea, business model. Actually, you have a good problem, hair on fire. Business model, that's the business canvas we will talk about. What are the different parts that I need? I need customers. I need to have maybe some partners that I collaborate with. Then I need revenues. Maybe I have costs. We will talk about it. Then you have the MVP, minimal viable product. I think it's super important not to only have one MVP, but multiple. Everything that in the first step of the business model is a hypothesis for me. So everything about, okay, how do I reach the customers? How do I target them? What kind of product do I offer them? At what timeline? Everything for me is a hypothesis, and everything needs to be tested out. So if in the coming months you're testing out a product, don't think about one MVP. Think about multiple MVPs that you think about. Then ideally product market fit. Most of the people fail here. They think, oh, you have to come up with the idea. That's the hardest. No, the hardest thing is to find that the product actually fits the market. And that's also a thing that can shift. So talking about SumUp again, I think for SumUp it took like 7 or 8 years to find product market fit. Only during the Corona times then in Germany, people decided to use credit cards. So that is going to be the toughest ones. Then scaling, and then obviously the exit. And once you scale, it is also super important to look back into your legal structures and can your contracts, for example, scale also with your idea. That said, those are the 3 stages, idea, concept, validation, growth, which each of those steps, you will find different contracts. In the beginning, maybe it's just an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, maybe a letter of intent, or you just want to feel, is there maybe a need for this problem that I'm targeting? And so you're signing maybe letter of intents, NDAs, then a pilot agreement maybe comes in, and then terms and conditions. The question always comes up, what's the difference between a pilot agreement and T's and C's? Sometimes there's not too much of a difference, but it's just a different header. So if you go to someone and you say like, hey, I'm a young company, I'm just trying it out, and then you come with a 30-page terms and conditions, no one is going to sign it. But if you maybe put a little pilot agreement there for a couple of months and it doesn't feel too stuck up, it feels better. But in the end, as we will talk about the different elements of terms and conditions, you will find them also into a pilot agreement. Then, more importantly, Matthias, you will talk about data, super important. Not only when you sign customer contracts and you think about the business model, it's not only, okay, what are the goods and the services that are moving around? In nowadays world, 21st century, the gold of the 21st century is black. It's data. Where is the data moving? We're in a regulated space. So it's super important to think of, when you think about your business model, not only what kind of services going from A to B, where's the data going from A to B? And when you jump on a first call with a lawyer, a data lawyer, that will be the question. Can you show me a mind map? Can you show me a flow chart of where's this data moving? Because then you can put that actually into the contracts. Service agreements, SaaS agreements, we will talk all about those topics. So that's why it's important. Let's start with step 1. How is it possible to write customer contracts? And as I said, the most easiest thing is to write customer contracts is to have a really good understanding of your business model. I think it's always funny when clients of ours go to our lawyers and they jump on a call, and then the lawyer actually has to explain the business model to them. For like 2-3 hours, the lawyer is like, okay, so how does it really work? What is your key activity? What's your value proposition? What kind of channels do you use? What kind of data do you store? And it's always funny, when we wrote our first terms and conditions for our company, that was really the moment where I understood the magic of our company. Okay, how do we get the clients from A to B? What kind of service do we provide? But that said, if you prepare to jump on a call with a lawyer, that is really the homework that you should do before, because otherwise the lawyer will do it for you and the lawyer will charge you in the end, because most of the lawyers are paid per hour. So really have a good understanding of your business model. The better you have an understanding of your business model, the easier it is to write also your customer contracts. You have 2 perspectives as a founder. So if you're starting a company right now, I think there's the commercial side that you need to think about from when you think about customer contracts. It's, okay, clarification of the business strategy. What do I want to achieve? With whom? With what kind of data? To who, at what price, when? So that should determine your customer contract. I often see people just copy pasting wildly some customer contracts from the internet, and it's not, maybe you get there really quick and you have like, oh, now I copy pasted it and threw it into Claude or ChatGPT, but it does not really follow your business strategy. And that will, in Germany, would say, bite you in the butt. I don't know if that's the English saying, but it will haunt you afterwards, because it is not the terms and conditions or the customer contracts that you want, that serve you. And it could be also in a pilot project. I've seen like people signing pilot project with first clients. And it was all about that they actually get the data and that the clients give them feedback. Okay, they just copy pasted wildly some pilot agreement from someone. And it was not in it that A, that the client needs to share data, and B, that they need to jump on a feedback call. So that did not follow the business strategy. So really think about your business strategy, and that then determines the contract strategy, and not the other way around. And if you copy paste something widely, it often is that you get a contract and then you try to squeeze in your business model, and that doesn't really work. So that's the commercial side, and that should be the driving force. But obviously, also depending on what area you're in, it can be and should be also a view from a legal side on what is feasible. Matthias, what would you say from a legal side when you look at the business? What are the things that you look at?
So at first, we have to understand the product or service the company is offering. For us, that's crucial. If you want to design contracts afterwards, you have to understand the product and the service first. That's always the first step. And as you have already mentioned, Leon, some founders do have difficulties to define this core part of their business. And we try to help them. And From time to time, it happens that with our help, companies find out what their whole company is about in the end. So that's a funny side effect of talking about contracts or trying to set up contracts, that it helps people understand their business better, as you've already mentioned.
Perfect. And one example, I just skipped that page. I think this is a really nice flow chart of where most software and tech companies are, right? You're either product-led or you're sales-led. What does it mean? You either go on the website and you just click your way through. For example, Calendly, I think everyone knows Calendly. That's a typical product-led. You go on the website, you sign up, you make an account, you decide for the free version or the basic or enterprise version or the premium version. You click through and you say terms and conditions, yes, let's go, sign up, done. The other one is sales-led. That's often for more complicated products. It's when you speak to a salesperson. So you go somewhere and you say, okay, I want to book a call, especially when you sell to an enterprise. Then often in the B2B world, it's sales-led. That means individual contracts are drafted and you go through like a whole process, maybe a legal due diligence. Super important to have your legal ducks in a row. You individually sign a contract, you send it over, maybe with DocuSign, then you get it back. So that is maybe interesting for those people who think about a product-led service or do the ones that are sales-led and the regarding contracts that you need. Product-led, often it's just terms and conditions, privacy policy. When it's sales-led, it's often a little bit more complicated. Maybe it starts with a pilot or a development agreement, then comes a SaaS agreement. You sign some NDAs to it, etc. All right. So step one already checked. So the easier, the more homework you do and you know your business, the easier is it obviously to draft your contracts. You can also outsource all of it and say like, hey, I don't want to deal with it. Please, lawyer Matthias, do everything from the start. But obviously then it takes more time and time is money. So just be mindful about that. Elements of a contract. What are the key elements of a B2B contract?
Yeah, thank you, Leon. I would say we should talk about the distinction upfront. So when talking about contracts in a business context, we have to distinguish between B2B contracts and B2C contracts. That means contracts between two businesses and contracts between a business, so the startup on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, a consumer. So that means a private person. Because depending on this relationship, more or less possible when drafting and designing a contract. We will get back to that later on in detail. So let's firstly start off with B2B customer contracts. And before we even talk about liability or other very special legal clauses, we need to talk about product and commercial structure. We already have touched on this a bit, because the biggest mistakes in early contracts are mostly not real legal mistakes, but they are strategic mismatches, so to say. So let's go through the essentials. First of all, and I've already mentioned that, we have to talk about product description and scope. This is one of the most underestimated clauses in our practice. If your scope in a contract is vague, you're legally exposed. If it's too detailed and too customized, you destroy scalability. So we really do have to find a balance. And the first question is, are you selling a product? Do you already have a product, or are you promising a project? So what Leon has already mentioned are pilot project drafts and pilot project contracts. And in those contracts, most of the time, there is no finished product, but a project promised. And it's very important that you answer this question upfront. Are you selling a product? Are you promising a project? And this distinction alone changes your entire risk profile and must be obeyed when drafting the contract. Pricing and subscription model. Your pricing logic must be reflected very clearly in the contract. So is your pricing model usage-based? Is it seat-based? Is it milestone-based? Is it auto-renewing? And we do see many disputes starting because pricing mechanics were not clearly documented. Hence, from an investor perspective, we also advise investors. And I can say from that point of view, pricing and the subscription model, for example, are crucial. So whenever we do have to do a due diligence for investors, we always look very precisely at pricing and subscription And if that is not defined clearly, we flag it in our due diligence report.
And maybe to jump in here, I think pricing is, it's absolutely underestimated. And if you think about, again, jumping back here to why it's so important to think about those stages, because maybe in the beginning you say, okay, I'm just testing out, the business model MVP, and you think, if they pay me 1,000 euros so that they can use my tool, I don't know, to manage their car fleet, let's do like B2B enterprise, that's a lot of money, right? And that's nice. But imagine you sign 5 customers like that, and then they're using you for years, and you're stuck with the price because you said that is the price, 1,000 euros. And then you grow and grow, and suddenly not only one person in that company is using you, maybe 5, and then suddenly 10 and 15, but the price stays the same. So you're losing a lot of upside potential if you don't define it immediately, thinking also ahead. But when you do those contracts, and especially I think when it comes to the pricing subscription, think about now. Obviously, it needs to be a nice entry. Like maybe you do like a free trial or something, but also already think, and those are, I think, differentiates good founders from bad founders. Think about, okay, how could it look in 6 months? How could this look in 12 months? And if actually more and more people are using it, is that reflected in the price or in the pricing structure? And do I benefit from it?
Thank you, Leon. Intended use, point 3, this is your shield. You can see intended use as a way of protecting you from liability. So intended use means define what your product is intended for and what it is not intended for, because otherwise customers will use your software in very creative ways, and you might suddenly be liable for something you never designed the software for. So be very precise about what you have built your software for and what is outside of the intended use. Service levels.
Very scary there, Matthias, to jump in. I think there's a scary thing of copy pasting, especially American competition. Because in the United States, often there's kind of this general liability, I'm jumping out of it, that doesn't work in Germany. I think, Matthias, in Europe countries, that doesn't work. So that is a way actually to protect your liability. You won't be liable for things that you haven't promised. But if you make your product description intended use very wide, you suddenly are also to a certain extent liable for it. So be precise enough that you can say, no, I just promised this. And obviously then I'm also only liable for what I've promised. And if you misuse it for something else, not my fault.
Right. So service levels, availability. If you promise uptime in your contract, define it properly. What we often see in early stage startups contracts is that they often promise enterprise level reliability, and actually they don't have enterprise level infrastructure. So be very careful what you promise. Because if you promise something, if you promise a certain level of availability, you're liable for that. And that is a key element of your contract, and you cannot exclude liability for those key elements. Updates and future changes, that is especially crucial for SaaS contracts, so software as a service contracts. The question here is, can you change features? Can you discontinue some models? And if this is not regulated properly, you might lock yourself into an early MVP forever. So you are encouraged to start your business using a MVP, a minimal viable product, but please make sure that this is not the end, but just the beginning. So make sure that you're free enough for further developments. Onboarding delivery, please define who does what. What are the dependencies? When does payment start? Because a clear onboarding clause avoids cash flow conflicts. And, cash flow is important not only for startups, but also for established companies. So please make sure that there is a payment plan in place, and a payment plan especially for which you can hold your customer liable for in the end. All of these points are not just legal clauses, they are in the end operational decisions that determine whether your company scales or gets stuck in custom work. So now we can move from the commercial structure to what I would call the legal backbone of your contract. These are the clauses that protect your company when things go wrong. And let me be very clear here. Everything is fine until it isn't. So contracts are not written for a moment of peace. They are written for war. And they are written for the moment when the shit hits the fan. And so we definitely need some key elements, those legal backbones that should be in place in each and every customer contract. Intellectual property rights, another thing that is very important, for example, in due diligences, when you are trying to onboard, for example, new investors or even in exit scenarios, it always gets scrutinized whether the intellectual property rights are within the company. And if they are not there, well, this is a deal breaker. So intellectual property rights are who owns what. Are you granting a license when exercising your contract? Or are you even transferring ownership with regards to the IP? And the founders sometimes use very unclear wording here, especially in custom development scenarios. And if you accidentally transfer IP instead of licensing it, you may lose control over your own core technology. And as I said, that would mean a deal breaker for investments and for exits. Limitation of liability. Lots of the questions you have handed into Ekaterina deal with this very important topic, the limitation of liability. I would say the limitation of liability clause is probably the most important clause in your early contracts. Without a proper limitation, your financial exposure is theoretically unlimited. If you're using a legal form, like in Germany, a GmbH, so a German limited liability company, then liability is kept at the amount of the capital of your company. But if you're doing business, for example, as a solo entrepreneur, then there is no such cap. And therefore, it's very, very, very important to cap your limitation, to limit a limitation within your contracts. So let's imagine your SaaS tool fails for a large customer. They claim lost profit of several million. Without the cap, that risk is yours and that risk is real. So you need a conscious liability strategy, usually linked to the contract value. And it must be legally enforceable, not just copied from the internet, because lots of clauses that are copied from the internet are void in the end. So therefore, it's very, very, very important that those limitation of liability clauses are designed properly. And this is a point where you will need a lawyer in lots of cases, to be honest. Termination. Can customers terminate anytime? Are there minimum terms, renewals, and such? And to be honest, this is quite important as well, because termination, auto renewals, subscriptions affect the revenue, and especially the recurring revenue, and therefore the valuation of your company on the one hand, and on the other hand, it also leads to a kind of cash flow predictability. Termination clauses, therefore, are in the end business decisions, not just legal wording, and they are also very important for investors. Governing law and jurisdiction, especially relevant if you're going to scale internationally. Where do disputes get resolved, under which law? And this becomes highly relevant, especially once you sign your first international deal. Others often ignore this until the first cross-border conflict happens. Quick story from our practice. We once advised a UK-based venture capitalist who simply refused to pay our invoice. What saved the situation? Our engagement letter, that is to say, our customer contract, clearly states German law applies, and Munich is the place of jurisdiction. So we sued the VC here in Munich. We, in the end, and not because of aggressive lawyering, but because the contract was structured properly from day one. That's the point. And what you can see here, don't mess with Pike Partners. So in the end, your first contracts don't just protect you, they quietly define how scalable and enforceable your business becomes. Data protection, data processing agreements. Yeah, I mean, it's a boring topic, but an important one. If you process personal data, you need a processing agreement, especially in SaaS contracts. This is not optional. Missing DPAs can block enterprises and enterprise deals immediately. And many procurement departments won't even continue negotiations without it. So if you do not have those documentations in place, they won't even talk to you in the end.
And I would say, Matthias, just to add on it, we see a lot of clients in the past months that work in the AI field. There's some sort of an AI wrapper processing data in the accounting space, in the health tech space, in the fintech space, you name it. And I think data protection there is even more relevant. The data is processed, and it's not only processed through that company, but often then shared through Claude, ChatGPT, you name it. And I think it is important there to be upfront with it. So we, for example, Velsa, we work together with law firms, and they're going to do a little DD on us when they work with us, obviously. But we don't push it in the back and it's like, okay, if they ask, then we come out with it. But we proactively talk about it. And be like, okay, data protection is something that we take very serious. And I think that is in a sales process, a USP that you can build out. If you are data GDPR compliant, don't hide it. Be different to your competition. Say like, hey, here's already a one-pager. This is your data, and that is what we're going to do with it. So as I said in the beginning, most of the businesses nowadays that are started are somewhere related about data and data processing, often also personal data. And I think it's often the USP. You can be like, hey, I'm compliant. I've thought about this, and this is how we're going to deal with your data. And that differentiates you often from 90% of the market, because they will only, especially young companies, will only think about data protection if someone points the finger at it. So be different, use it as a USP, and actually push it out like, hey, I'm compliant. And you don't need to worry about it because we obviously have proactively thought about it. And this is not only relevant for customers, also for investors. Investors, that's one of the first questions they will ask if you are an AI company. Okay, how do you deal with the data? Do you have a legal roadmap that is in conjunction with those compliance, and step by step is making sure that you're compliant? Obviously, you don't need to be 100% compliant from day one. That is not possible. That is not feasible. I can say that because I'm not a lawyer, but at least you need to have an MVP compliance. Step, okay, for the first 5 customers, we need this. If we reach 100, then we need to do this. And a good lawyer like Matthias, for example, will also think about that. I think that's how you can see a good lawyer from a bad lawyer. A good lawyer will think, okay, what do we need in the MVP stage? What do we need in the scaling stage? A bad lawyer would say, okay, we need everything right at the beginning. Sometimes it's necessary, obviously, when you're in like a super regulated space and a financial space, for example, but most of the time you can really take it step by step. You can say, okay, what is the legal MVP that we take in the beginning? And then when we go bigger, when the risk exposure is higher, what kind of legal guardrails and safety nets do we need then?
Yeah, I would say that the contract and the legal concept of your company really and definitely should grow together with the company, because it does not make sense to pay, I don't know, 2/3 of your share capital for lawyering. So we do use the approach, start with a legal MVP, as Leon described it, and let it grow with your business.
And I think that's super important to think of. Legal can be a signal. It can be a very positive and strong signal. Okay, hey, I have those contracts ready. Talking about whether or not you should start a UG and GmbH. If you're in the B2B sales world, no one is going to work together with you if you are just a private person most often, or you have been 20 years a CEO, maybe then. But that's about signaling. Okay, I have a UG, I have a GmbH. Okay, I have good customer contracts. I have thought about data protection. That shows that you have thought about your business model, and that you are trustworthy partner. And I think that's in the end in sales, when you get your first customers, is they're looking for signals of trust. And they're like, okay, they're registered in Munich, they're a GmbH or UG. It's actually fine to be UG as well. They have good customer contracts and they have thought about data protection. Those are signs of trust, and those signs of trust will in the end increase your conversion.
Yeah, and I would say the same holds true for regulatory compliance. So if you operate in regulated sectors, like Leon mentioned, fintech, health tech, AI, your contract should reflect compliance responsibilities. Who ensures regulatory conformity? Who monitors updates? Who bears the risk of regulatory change? And as Leon said, regulation is becoming a competitive sector here. So if you can show, well, we are compliant and we do have our things in place with regards to compliance, then it's a very big step towards signing a customer contract in the end. So you can negotiate in B2B, in B2C, the law negotiates for you. Sounds interesting. So we are here in B2, and so we leave the B2B area in which everything is possible, not everything, but lots of things are possible. And now we're moving to B2C. In B2B, you can negotiate. With regards to B2C, this is where things fundamentally change. So you're not negotiating with the customer. I mean, you can, but in the end, you're negotiating with the legislator. And the legislator is not flexible. Why are you negotiating with the legislator? Because there is consumer protection law in place. And this consumer protection law is protective by design, which means many clauses that are perfectly valid in B2B are simply invalid in B2C. And here's the dangerous part. You might not notice, because your clause still looks fine. It's written down. It's in your T&Cs. They are sounding cool. They are sounding legal, but in the end, they are legally ineffective. And if a clause is ineffective, the statutory default applies, and that default is usually not in your favor, usually not in the favor of the business, because the legislator and the law is of the opinion that the consumer, so the C in B2C, is in a weaker position, and therefore it must be protected by law.
Matthias, could you maybe give an example of like a B2C law that wouldn't be, you could write it in a contract, but it wouldn't be valid?
One possibility would be a cap of liability that is unreasonably broad. So you can do it, for example, in a pilot contract with a business customer where you, for example, start to develop a product together. You can cap liability. You can also exclude liability in certain cases. But with regards to consumers, you can just not do this. So it's not possible.
I think one prominent one is, for example, B2C. Correct me if I'm wrong. You say, okay, I'm selling online, I don't know, watches. You say, like, once the watch is bought, it's your watch and I'm not going to take it back. You can write it in a contract, but from my understanding, it would be not valid because you have Widerrufsrecht. So you need to take it back if the customer doesn't want it anymore. I think within, 14 days?
Yeah, 14 days. And I would say that's a perfect bridge to slide 17 and those things that must be in place when you're setting up B2C contracts. Let me focus on the right of withdrawal here. As Leon has already mentioned, consumers usually have a statutory right to withdraw from the contract. And this means they can cancel within a specific period, typically those 14 days already mentioned. But here's the catch. You must properly inform customers about this right. You must provide instructions how to withdraw from the contract. And you also must provide a withdrawal form. And if you fail to do that correctly, the withdrawal period can extend dramatically. And that can destroy revenue. And especially for digital products, it can be a real pain in the ass, so to say. And this is not only theoretical. There was a well-known case, which was partly also handled by our law firm. It involved a very large car rental and leasing company. Probably all know the brand with the orange and black logo. And for years, parts of their consumer withdrawal instructions were legally flawed. And the consequences here were enormous because consumers were able to withdraw from leasing contracts even years later. And in many cases, they were not only released from the contract, but they could even claim reimbursement of leasing payments already made. So think about that for a second. A relatively small compliance issue in the withdrawal documentation created massive financial exposure on a large scale. So in the end, those customers could drive their BMW for 2 years, and after the 2 years, they could claim reimbursement for the leasing payments. So yeah, they drove the BMW free of charge. So small legal details can create very, very large economic consequences. So please do not mess with those legal must-haves in B2C contracts. They are very, very important. Keep your first contract simple and scalable. Your first contract should enable fast sales. Scalability starts in legal structure. Don't be overcomplicated here. Keep it simple and scalable. Align the contract with your business model, your pricing logic, your product logic, and legal logic must match in the end. If you sell subscriptions, your termination clause must reflect it. If you sell usage-based pricing, your measurement mechanics must be clearly defined, and misalignment creates disputes here, and disputes cost you energy and money in the end. Clearly define your product and scope. We've already said that this is very often underestimated. Clarity reduces conflict here, and multi-meaning increases risk. Limit your liability consciously. Liability limitation is not about being aggressive, it's about survival. So therefore, make sure that there is a cap in place, and if a bad incident happens, then you are shielded by this cap. Leon, the don'ts, do you want to take over?
I can take over the don'ts. I think the most important for me, I'm in charge of the commercial, the sales part of Velsa. For us, over-engineering the contract is the most important. I think first we had massive terms and conditions. I think they were like 20 pages long. And then people didn't sign them. And I asked myself, why didn't it sign? And then we also changed the design of those contracts. For example, in the B2B world, we have an offer form. So we pull out of the big terms and conditions, we pull out the individual parts and we put it into an offer form. And then we just link to the terms and conditions. And that has totally changed the conversion rates once I send over a contract, because it's easier to digest. Okay, it's not a 20-page long contract. It's a one-pager with the relevant individual information, like, okay, what's the pricing? How long does this contract run? And then all the terms and conditions that are in general, that are relevant for all customers, they're in the terms and conditions. So really think about the design of your contracts, and how to make it simple. Second one, don't copy contracts blindly, as I said, especially if not from the US. I think that's dangerous. You should start with a good example. I think that is Velsa. You can come to our website and download any contracts that you need. NDA, letter of intent, SaaS, B2B, B2C. I've seen the business model that some of you wrote into the chat. That's a good starting point. And obviously do your homework before talking to a lawyer, but don't copy and paste blindly. Last one, don't leave key terms vague. I think we talked about it. The more precise you are, that is the one that you deliver. I think it's also important that your marketing and your website matches with those contracts. What I see often is that marketing, they say, oh, we're going to increase your revenue by X. And then you write that into the contract. And obviously you can't promise that. But if you write it into a contract, you kind of are bound by that. So people can go back and say, like, hey, you promised 100x revenue, didn't deliver. I want to get my money back. So make sure that your marketing actually matches with your contracts, and be precise. And lastly, don't forget proper incorporation of terms and conditions, especially if you're in the B2C world and you have a click flow on your website, people signing up. Make sure that all the parts are in proper order, like the data protection parts, the terms and conditions that are signed are actually valid, because in the end, if your company grows in the beginning, maybe you have 2-3 clients, so the risk exposure is not that high. I always like to have the formula, okay, what is the likelihood that it happened, and what is then the cost of it? In the beginning, maybe the likelihood is very low because you don't have a lot of customers, but as you grow, suddenly this multiplies. So maybe then the cost is still, I don't know, $500 or 500 euros, but it makes a difference if you have 2 clients times 500, or you have 200 times 500, right? So make sure that you think about that and properly incorporate that. All right, let's jump into the Q&A. After the Q&A, if you don't want to ask the question in the big room here, please take your phones out and scan this code here. This goes to a one-on-one session with Matthias and myself. We can just talk about your legal topic, if it's B2C or B2B, your contracts, your incorporation of the company. But yeah, please feel free to book a one-on-one session. I will also link Matthias' profile in the chat if you don't want to address the topic now in the open Q&A. With that, let's go. What are the questions?
All right, Leon, we have only 8 minutes, so I will try to be really quick. And the biggest question, the most frequent one, was which legal form to choose in Germany to start, like Freiberufler, UG, GmbH. What's your, like, maybe there is a simple answer to that. Maybe you could cover this.
I would say the simple answer is it depends. So it's not very satisfying, to be honest, but it's the matching answer. So the question is, what are you planning to do? Is there a high liability risk? I mean, if you're in a business in which liability is not very likely, for example, you want to try out to set up a new publishing house for books and you want to publish your own stories that you have written, I would say there is no big liability risk. You can try this out as a sole entrepreneur, so without setting up a incorporation. That would mean that there is a personal liability, but as the risk is quite low, I would say that is okay in that case. On the other hand, if you are going to, for example, you want to set up a company in the area of, I don't know, chemistry, and you want to sell very decent chemistry products to B2B customers or even to B2C, well, then there is no doubt that there is quite a liability risk. And me personally would not do this without a company form in which liability is kept. That said, you would have to look out for GmbH. A UT is, so to say, the small brother or sister of a GmbH. And the good thing is you can set it up with €1. Whereas when you want to set up a GmbH, you need 12,500 euros as a minimum capital.
Yeah.
I would say to set up a UT is okay. In the business world, companies and people know the UT nowadays. I myself set up the first UT, I would say 15 years ago. Then it was not that common to have a UT in place, and people were very suspicious when doing business with us. But as I said, nowadays it's totally fine to start off using a UT.
But maybe just to touch on that, and we can also then talk about the side hustle part. I think we live in a world where it's so easy to set up an MVP. Obviously, there are costs involved with setting up a company. Yeah? So with the UG and GmbH, it doesn't matter, right? You then need to you need to incorporate. That's about 800, 900 euros. You need to go to a notary. Maybe you need to go to a lawyer to set up your contracts. But there's also like a standard that you can do. Then you need to do the tax filing in the end of the year. So only if 1 year, you roughly have operating costs of 1,500 setting it up and then operating it. So think about that. Really think of what I said right in the beginning. If you have a good problem, again, underserved, urgent, unavoidable, and you test it out, and you can test it out so easy. You know? Everyone can go on Lovable today and build a nice website and see, do people click on the button? Do they test it out? Do they jump on a call with me? So really test it out. And if you see those signs, then really go in. And then you can set it up. So just setting up, we have a lot of clients sometimes, they set up an UG and GmbH and they not even have a business model. And then I say like, hey, guys, ladies and gentlemen, first, it's so easy nowadays to test it out, have those signs, have those tractions that we talked about, and then start a company, because obviously it is associated with costs. Talking about a side hustle, I think, as I said, it's easy to test things out. And if you're working for an employee, for example, when I worked at SumUp, I started also my first company. My contract stated that I needed to get the approval. So just said it, hey, if you have a side hustle, you need to get approval. So I went to my manager at that time, said, hey, I would like to start this side hustle. It was not Velsa, it was something else. It was also related to the company. So it was actually perceived as something super positive. I worked in a big scale up, so it was like entrepreneurial mindset. It was positive. Hey, and I'm just going to work on the weekend. And so he approved it back in the time. But talking about the side hustle, that is something you need to look into your employment contract. Normally it states that you can do it, but it needs the approval. That is the standard. And you need to also make sure, obviously, if it's in competition, not in competition to what you're doing there, you need to be a bit careful. So sometimes maybe something that in a one-on-one call with Matthias that he can answer to look over it. Matthias, notes on this side hustle part?
I would say you summarized it perfectly. We see such clauses in most employment contracts. So you are allowed to do a side hustle, but you have to give notice to the employer upfront. Then the employer is not allowed to forbid this side hustle if there are no reasons that, for example, are detrimental for the employer, as Leon described it. If you are going to build up a competitor, well, then the employer is allowed to forbid your engagement in the side hustle. But as long as that is not the case, you're quite free in most cases.
And if you end your employment, I think that's often a question. Is there like a post-employment clause that they can prevent you from starting a competitor? Often that is only liable if they keep on paying you. So there's normally some employers scare you and say, you can't build up a competitor. Well, they can if they keep on paying you. If they don't pay you, most of the time you actually can start a business as you want. We live in a free world, in a free economy. You can do whatever you want. Last part, maybe on that side, from an investor perspective. I don't know if some of you are looking to fundraise. Investors will not mostly invest in you if you do this as a side hustle. They're looking for people who have the drive and who go all in. Building a company has something to do with liking risk and being risk loving. So if you are into the fundraising, make sure that this is your plan A and not just the side hustle and plan B. It's very hard to raise money for a side hustle. I've personally, in my life, I've never seen someone raise money, especially VC or business angel money, if it's just a side hustle. Commit, try it out, set yourself some money apart, especially if you're working in a corporate job right now. Make sure that you have maybe a runway of, let's say, 10 months, maybe 12 months, save up some money and then commit for a full year. Yeah, okay, I'm going to try this out. I will tell you, this is the best and wildest experience of your life. You learn so much. Mostly, even if it fails, you have learned so much. Everyone wants you back because you have this entrepreneurial experience. So we talk a lot. I talked with Ekaterina on a podcast about this. I love it. People in corporate jobs, they have so much experience, exposure, and so much knowledge. Them actually starting, it's a perfect position. And it's not this out of uni 16-year-old who starts a company. The most successful entrepreneurs are over 35 kids and have worked for 10 years in a corporate job. So that's the place to be. Those are the ones that actually build the big companies, not the dropouts.
Yeah, and we very much inspire doing so. And if anyone needs to start and sort out their business model, they can always come to 12 Brave and sort it out. Thank you very much, Leon, Matthias. That was super useful. And I think every founder can work through this presentation and workshop, like step by step, to see what needs to be done. Even for myself, I thought I know everything, but obviously many things were covered today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it's just in 1 hour, such a condensed knowledge about what needs to be done, for not only from legal perspective, but also from business perspective. It's insane. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was very nice seeing you all. I've also shared in the chat the profile of Matthias, where you can book a discovery call. I would join there as well, and we can just have a little, Matthias and I, we call it a ping pong, a little ping pong about your business and figure out what needs to be done. And also I've shared a link to all the contracts that also we have generated with Matthias together, some of them. So if it's about incorporating your company, if it's about employment contracts, if it's about customer contracts, you find all of that. And that is often a good starting base. So if you think, I want to start a business, B2B, or I've seen B2C, get one of those contracts, walk through it. And then if you have questions, jump on a call with Matthias and myself, and we can give you a little bit more guidance of if this is the right fit and what needs to be done before you send it over to a customer. Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.